Ah, there we are. Fantastic. Good, good. All right, people see me. That is great. Welcome, everybody. We're just gonna give people a few minutes to connect, maybe refresh the YouTube page. And then I'm excited to get started. Let me know if there are any issues with quality, picture quality, if you can see everything in good resolution, hear me well. And now we get started soon. If you're waiting, make sure you have a pair of instances. That works. One of them is known as front end, one of them is known as data API. So you should have two different IP addresses or two different DNS names and a set of credentials. And we'll get started when I get the green light. Good. So if you've just joined, welcome. And we're just waiting until people are generally ready. I'm going to trickle in over the next couple of minutes and then we'll get started. It's good, I can see that people are getting set up with the instances. If you don't know how to get your instance, there is a link which I believe will be in the description of the YouTube video, and you'll need to put your meetup username in there. That is not your login name, it's not your email address, it'll be your display name. So in my case, it's actually just Jeff Hammond, but I haven't actually registered. I thought it was going to be boring. Alright, I think we're pretty much done then. If you have any more issues, please join our Slack channel. The link is also in the description below, as the youngsters say. And there will be a squadron of people overjoyed to help you. Now let's get started with a quick introduction. How does one PowerPoint? One PowerPoints as such. I have no idea if you guys can see what I want you to see, but I'm fairly certain you can. I'll check Slack in 2 seconds to make sure. So welcome to today's playground. Actually, there's a little blurb that I should read. Hello, my name is Jeff, and I will be hosting this evening's DevOps playground. Before we kick things off, just a little background on the playground. Started back in 2015, this is pre-pandemic, this humble community has grown from 10 to over 5,000 worldwide. So thank you for supporting the playground by joining us here tonight. Our provide a platform to share and collaborate knowledge amongst all of our members, and we do this by running a monthly technical hands-on session with some of the emerging and popular DevOps tools. So tonight's definitely going to be hands-on, which is why you need those instances, guys. The good news is each playground is run by a qualified ECS engineer, even if I do say so myself. So you know you're in safe hands. For those who haven't heard of ECS, ECS is an award-winning digital transformation consultancy. We adopt agile and DevOps techniques to rapidly upskill teams, accelerate release cycles, and drive meaningful innovation with our skill set covering everything from cloud adoption and digital engineering to data analytics and customer experience. And honestly, my own personal point of view, I know this is controversial, but I would recommend ECS. They are also the sponsors of the DevOps Playground and are always on the lookout for engineers keen to drive real change in their work. Before we get going, remember to sign up to the Slack community channel, link below, so we can offer technical support during the playground and have our instance login details to hand, as you'll be needing those soon. If you need a bit more time on a particular section, feel free to either pause the live session and be sure to revisit from tomorrow once it's been pushed live to our channel. And I think that's it. So let's go. Let me just make sure that people were able to see. Were people able to see the PowerPoint and my face? Not that my face is particularly important at the moment, but I'm sure they would have been. Right, so DevOps Playground, welcome. Tonight's playground is hands-on with Service Mesh with Consul Connect. So those of you familiar with Consul, hopefully are not too familiar yet with Consul Connect. So we'll explore what that is. Just covered what a DevOps Playground is. It's aiming to inspire tech enthusiasts to explore new technology during hands-on monthly events. We're really proud of this being a hands-on event. It's not just a boring talk you go to and then you think you understand things, you go home and then actually you have no idea how to start. Here we get our hands dirty and you have a really good reference point in your minds on how to use these technologies when it's over. So this is me. Also pre-pandemic, maybe you can see a very slight change. I am a delivery consultant at ECS Digital. I am HashiCorp certified in various HashiCorp disciplines. I'm a trumpet and a French horn player. And if we get really stuck tonight, I'll just improv on the trumpet, so you're in safe hands. And a grade 5 shower singer. So if the trumpet fails, that's my fallback. So let's get started with what is Consul. And again, let me just quickly check that everything is showing. Looks fine. So what is Consul? Consul is created by HashiCorp and it has 3 main use cases, some of which you might be familiar with. So there's a distributed key value store. There is service discovery, which many people, I expect, will have used or at least will know of. And then there's what we'll explore tonight, which is Service Mesh. So let's have a quick look at all of these in a tiny bit more detail. So the key value store is literally just a place a distributed place on your network where you can store values associated with specific keys. There's a hierarchical organization. It's quite powerful, but it's not what we're focusing on tonight. What you could use it for is you can store your application configuration, tell your application at runtime, is it prod or is it test, or even if you need to, for example, completely lock down your app. I've had a situation in one of my past jobs where we did database maintenance, and we wanted to put the application in read-only mode, so people couldn't register, they could only sign in, and that actually took us, I think, the better part of an hour by doing an Ansible deploy that would redeploy everything just to change one single parameter for application. If you set up Consul, you can do it with the click of a button or one API call or one CLI command. There's also watches, which is another cool feature. You might know it as long polling, so your application can actually wait until a specific key changes and then update it basically instantly. You can use Consul, the KV store, as a backend for various technologies, for example, Terraform and Vault, which are other HashiCorp products. It also has a locking feature, so you can also use it to have, if you've got a distributed application for one of the applications to require a lock, that's also a thing you can do with the KV store, and then it does cool stuff around consistency, resilience, and so on. But as I said, it's not what we're focusing on tonight. Tonight, what we're focusing on is service mesh, and I think it's worth going into service discovery first to see what that is and how service mesh is different. So I've prepared an application for tonight, spent way too much time on it, looks horrendous, you're gonna love it. It has two components, a front-end service called front-end and a back-end service, which I've called data API, and that basically persists stuff in a database. It's just a little SQLite file. So the way this currently works on your instances, and we're going to change that, but it's already cool the way it works, is using service discovery. So from the internet, we're going to connect to the front-end service. You can do that by just hitting the front-end instance, the one starting with FE, on port 80. That will then serve some stuff back, and whenever it needs to make an API request to the data API, it will do so directly, again using HTTP. The question is, and this is where service discovery comes into play, how does the front-end know where the data API is? This isn't the good old days where we had a room in a data center and we physically put our server there and we knew for the next 6 to 9 months, well, this is exactly where the database lives, where the backend API lives, this is its IP address, that doesn't change, and if something changed, we're going to log in and fix it. That's a thing of the past. What we do nowadays is all cloud microservices. So you spin this stuff up, you have no idea where it's going to be, and it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter. So this is where service discovery comes in. So let's have a look at the green arrow. So when the data API service starts, it talks to its local Consul agent on a well-known port, which is 8500, and on localhost. So it knows where to find it. It's not a question, it's just localhost 8500. And it says, hi, I'm data API. I listen on port 5001. Consul, being cool in distributed things and such, just synchronizes this information across the cluster. Now, when the front-end service starts, it also talks to its local Consul agent, also localhost, port 8500, and it says, I need to talk to a service called data API. Would you know where to find that? Consul then says, well, actually, it's on the same node as this agent, so I know the IP address. Yeah, here's the IP address. And it's told me its port, which is 5001, so here is the port. And that is what service discovery is. The green arrow is also known as service registration, and the orange arrow is known as service discovery, the service discovery part of service discovery. And then once the front-end service has discovered the data API, we can see the blue arrows is the actual traffic that we're interested in. Front-end service connects directly to the data API service on its private or network IP anyway, on port 5001. I haven't implemented HTTPS, so these two services are going to talk plain text HTTP to each other, which could be a problem, and we're going to see exactly how Service Mesh can help with this. Let me check if there are any questions so far. All the questions from the YouTube thread. I am not keeping an eye on the YouTube thread. Is the communication between the services mTLS encrypted like in Linkerd? So, give me 1 second. 1 second has now passed. The answer is yes. We're going to see exactly how, and this is where it's really cool. So, this is Service Mesh. The setup is roughly similar at first. We've got our front-end service, and we've got our data API talking to its local database. And then we've got a Consul cluster that spans both instances. The difference now is that we have Consul Connect proxies. So each instance has a proxy. It'll actually be each service, but we have one service per instance. So each service has a proxy. And we still have the equivalent of service registration with the green arrow, and another service registration. There should also be a green arrow. But basically, once this is set up, our front-end service won't need to worry about finding the data API service. It will just talk to its local Consul Connect proxy. And it'll say, I need to send this packet to the data API service. The Consul Connect proxy integrates with Consul tightly, obviously, figures out exactly who is who and what is where and so on, and can then talk to the other Consul Connect proxy, the proxy for the data API, over HTTPS, and yes, over mutual TLS. Mutual TLS means that it's not just the server that has a certificate, but also the client, which is pretty cool. You'll see that the connection from the front-end service to its proxy, as well as the connection from the data API's proxy to the data API, is still plain text HTTP, which is fine in any situation that I can think of. I don't know of any requirements in any company or industry or sector where you need to encrypt traffic that doesn't leave your host. So this is fine, but it's often in higher regulated sectors, you need to encrypt traffic even within your data center that flows in between hosts, in between instances. Also, the traffic coming into the front-end service is just HTTP because that's a whole other kettle of fish. So I'm going to break the fourth wall a bit here and let's pretend that's also secure somehow, because obviously it's all moot if that's not secure. So, cool. That is what Service Mesh is. And now let's have a look at how this works with Consul Connect. So Consul Connect is basically the offering of Consul that gives us Service Mesh. And you can find out more about it if you follow this link. Right, so Consul Connect is Service Mesh, also known as service segmentation. And that proxy element that we've seen is pluggable. So you can use, for example, Envoy, so well-known proxy software. You can use the Consul Connect proxy, which is the built-in, which is the one we'll use tonight. Or you can even bring your own. There exists integration guides, so you can write your own proxy, or you could even write your application natively Consul Connect aware, which is quite a cool challenge. So what are the advantages of using Consul Connect? So the applications connect to localhost on a well-known port, as we've seen. There's no need, therefore, for the applications to be Consul aware. They can just say, well, I know I need to talk to this API, and I know that I need to talk to my own localhost on this port, and however dynamic the rest of the environment is, this is all I need to know. This also works in containers, by the way. I haven't focused on containers or Kubernetes, which is really cool stuff. But basically, this also all works within, for example, Kubernetes, which I anticipate 30 to 40% of the questions will be about. So we also have no need for TLS because the unencrypted connection is just on the same instance. The proxies talk to each other over mutual TLS, So that connection is encrypted and authenticated. It's not enough to just accept the encryption, but you actually need to authenticate yourself with a client certificate. And you can customize this from a zero-touch setup where Consul just brings creates all the certificates and brings its own CA, to setting up a custom external CA and linking that up with Consul, for example, with HashiCorp's Vault integration. With Consul Connect, you'll also have identity-based access rules for each service. So that's instead of IP-based rules such as firewalls and security groups. So if you think about it, if I've got a firewall rule and I say, well, this instance should be allowed to connect to this instance, that means any service on that instance can now connect to yonder instance. However, with these identity-based access rules, it's only specific services, no matter if they're co-located on an instance that is allowed or isn't allowed, that these rules apply to. And lastly, there's quite a cool thing, well, not as cool for most of us hackers, but clients often, or companies often care about this, observability metrics and all that stuff. So if you use the service mesh for all your connections between services, you have a common set and a common format of metrics for all this inter-service traffic, and then you can stream that, for example, to Prometheus, and then you see exactly what the latency is or the response time for this and that service, and it'll be a common set and a common format, so you won't have different sets and different metrics for each different service. All right, let me check in if there are any questions. Someone is getting an error, so that's a WETI issue. So please ask Patrick with help for that, Grace. Otherwise, there don't seem to be many more questions, so let us move on. Yes, so the sample project I've prepared, let's go through it again now that we've got more context. We've got two components. We've got the front-end service. It's just a Python Flask web app. And we've got the data API service, which is also a Python Flask web app. The database is just an SQLite file. And the data API registers itself with the Consul cluster. The front-end API asks about the data API and then connects to it directly using plaintext HTTP. And what we're going to do in the hands-on section is to change this to this, the service mesh, where we are going to start two of these Consul Connect proxies, do the necessary Consul configuration, and then point the front-end service simply at the proxy, basically telling it no longer needs to talk to Consul, really. Then we'll also do a bit of hardening around that towards the end. So there we are. Let's begin. So I'll give everybody a minute to find this this repo. So it's on our DevOps Playground GitHub organization, and it's called Hands-on with Service Mesh with Consul Connect. So please navigate to this, and yes, please get started with your instances. The first section is, as you can clearly see, called Getting Your Bearings. So once you're done getting your bearings, the last instruction in each section is always, when done with this section, please spam the YouTube comments with specific emoji. And when my team see that emoji a lot, then they will know that the majority of people are happy to go on with that section, and they can let me know. So the way we're going to do this for each section is I'm going to read through it, then I'm going to give you some time to do it on your own, and then I'm going to go through it on my end to hopefully clear up any confusion, to walk through it together, point out a few interesting things, and hopefully help you with any issues you have. And again, if you have any issues, the Slack channel will help us. So 2 cloud instances have been provisioned for you, one called frontend and one called data API. You can log in. The credentials are wrong on this page, so please use the credentials that you get given from from the tab I just closed, which apparently doesn't open anymore. So yeah, please use those credentials. Frontend hosts a web app that listens for incoming connections from the internet and makes API calls to the other application. I've explained this, I think, twice now. Data API also hosts a web app that exposes a REST API to manage users and sessions and persist them on disk. Upon startup, Data API registers itself as a service with Consul, that is service registration. Front end, when it starts up, queries Consul for the address and port of a service called Data API. So first, let's have a look at what that looks like. Oop. So this is my backend, and this is my front end. So the first bullet point says navigate to just HTTP and then your front end IP address or DNS name. So in my case, that should be this one. And this is my fantastic web app, guys. I designed it myself. And play around with it. So let's just see what we can do. Log in, register, and do something. Do something tells us to log in. Obviously, we need to register before we can log in. Also, warning, guys. This will set a cookie in your browser. I know the EU is very worried about that, about you knowing about this and consenting to this. So if you do not consent to the cookie, please disconnect now. There will be a cookie. Right, I'm going to register. Now I'm registered. This is the login form. You can tell because there's no confirm password thing. Again, I'm not a UI designer. So now I can log in. Now I'm logged in, and now I can do something, and it has been did. Fantastic. Navigate to the Consul UI on either the front end or the Data API IP on port 8500 and explore the nodes and services. So 8500 will open the Consul UI, and now we can explore the different services. There's Consul, there's Data API, which, as you remember, has registered itself as a service, and there's two nodes, front end and Data API. Now there's a question for you guys here. What port is Data API listening on? And please remember that, set it as a variable in your head called Data API port, because we'll need it below. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes while I make myself a very quick instant coffee, because my throat is starting to become a bit sandpapery, and then we will see if there are any questions and go on in just a minute. That's the Zoom, and I'll be back in 1 minute. All right. So, question on YouTube: how do I find the front-end and back-end URLs? So those are the same as your instance. So the instance is a DNS name. I just go to the instance itself, HTTP port 80, and that is the front end. The back end, again, the back end, pardon me, the backend DNS name is its IP address, and the challenge now is how to find out what port this is. So let's move on a bit. What port is this that we should remember as data API port? And we can see, for example, if we go, if we check out Node Data API services, we can see Data API is running on port 5001. So that is the answer to that question. We can also see it under services and then Data API, and we see that there is a private IP address, so one that only works within AWS, but it still works if we connect to our public ones by virtue of how AWS networking works. And again, it's port 5001. So see if you can establish a connection to the data API. So HTTP, the DNS name of your data API, that port 5001, and /admin/ list all. So let's do that. It's here API, and then my animal port 5001 /admin/ list all. And here I'm getting a an error message that says this admin endpoint is protected. We'll come back to that a bit later, but that is all that we need to do now. Frontend basically follows the same approach. It connects to Consul. Consul agent runs on every node, listening on a well-known port 8500. It looks up the service it wants to connect to by name, just as we've just done, data API, and then it initiates a direct connection to that IP address and port, just like we've done here. So we can actually talk to the backend API directly. We'll have a look at how this works in the next section. So when you're caught up and happy to move on, please spam the YouTube comments with the bear emoji. In the meantime, a few questions. Is Consul Connect like API Gateway? I haven't worked with API Gateway intimately, but no, API Gateway is a single endpoint, as far as I know, that you send all requests to, and it can do layer 7 routing, i.e. it can have a look at the URL or the host name that you want to reach and then route the API request where it needs to go. And it can even start, route it to Lambda functions. And Consul has a bit more of a static setup, as we'll see. When we deploy a service and its proxy, we need to tell that proxy exactly which endpoints there should be, and then if that one is hit, then we already know what the outcome is. There's no layer 7 routing in there, so they're a bit different. Right, as I said, when you're done, please spam the YouTube comments with the bear emoji, and my team will let me know when we are good to go on. We've got 5 bears so far. Out of how many people attending overall, guys? Five bears out of 27, so I think let's give it another minute or two. Another question: Can Consul Connect load balance and autoscale? Like, if we need more instances of the microservice, does each instance need to register with Consul Connect? Each instance already needs to register with Consul Service Discovery, and this way each instance would need to bring its own proxy unless they're co-located. I think let's come back to these questions when we've done the hands-on bit, because that'll give us a much better idea of what the actual architecture of this is. Right, how are we looking with, there's not that much to do. Maybe people are still having issues getting their instance. So guys, I think if you are still working on it and you want more time, please send a few hourglass emojis in YouTube so that we know that you're wanting to catch up, because it's always possible that a few people have just given up or are doing it in their own time. So yeah, if you haven't sent in a bear yet, you're still working on it, and you want to do the whole playground where at the same pace as the rest of the team, please send a few hourglass emojis our way. And if there aren't any hourglass emojis in a minute or so, we'll just assume that there are 7 active members, and we'll take it from there. So we'll move on in just about half a minute. Thank you. Right, let's move on then. It looks like we've got 6 people with bear emojis. So let's move on to the next bit. So let's have a closer look at the service registration part of it. So I'm going to go through it, give you a few minutes to do this, and then we're going to do it together. So what we'll do is we'll log into the data API instance. You can either use SSH or the web TTY. And then please explore the file that is the data API service. It's on the opt dpg data API.py. You could, for example, type less opt dpg data API.py, hit enter, and then shift G to go to the very bottom of it. And you should see the following lines. And we're going to talk about what these lines do. So data API, which is the script, yeah, data API.py. It connects to its local console agent using the default settings. As I said, these are well known, so they don't change even if we go microservices. It's just plain text HTTP on localhost port 8500. And then it registers a service called data API. It registers itself. On a given port, the port is 5001, which is the port it'll later on then also start listening on. By default, the private IP address of the agent will be used, which is useful in our case as we don't have to implement logic to find out our own IP address inside data API.py. So you can see when we say console agent service register, we give it the name data API, we tell it which port to listen on, but then we don't specify which address, and Consul just infers, well, it must be the same address as the one of the local agent because it's a local agent. And this is exactly how the service data API comes to show up in the Consul UI. So again, Consul UI under services, we've got data API listed there. So please try and do this. Just have a look at the file yourselves. It should but take a few minutes, but it'll give you a much better grasp of what's happening if you just run these commands yourself. And when you're done with this section, please spam YouTube with the goal emoji. Because data API is kind of the goal that we want to get our connections into. Please also, guys, feel free to be very liberal, very liberal with your feedback. I think this is only the second or third playground that we're doing since lockdown. So it's a new format, obviously, it being all remote. So please be very liberal with your feedback. We don't take offense, and we always want to improve. So let us know if you like the setup, if you like YouTube, or if you'd prefer a different service. Pros and cons maybe. In this case, I've decided to split my journey into lots of different steps, and then, as I said, walk through them, wait for you guys to do them, and then do them myself. Tell me if that's a good idea, if it's too slow paced, if I should do more at once. As I said, we'll really appreciate any feedback we get. Right, we've got 5 emojis in YouTube so far, and I think last step we got 8, so that gives us a good indication of where people are at. And yeah, I've kept the journey short and light. I'm not trying to cover too much, so that we have more time for each step. Please really take your time, especially with the beginning steps. From experience, I know that from experience, I know that if I kind of skim over the beginning steps, even if they're trivial, I just have less of a point of reference as to, you know, what is deployed where, how it works, what listens where, and it just gets confusing later on. Whereas if I take my time and do the first steps, easy and trivial though they might be, it really helps in kind of seeing the bigger picture later on. So there's a question. I said somewhere in the document that data API should be launched first because the front end queries Consul for the port. I think that's probably a bit further on though. Oh. What have I done? I'm not sure where that is, but so basically the question is, what happens if Consul doesn't have an answer? Does it block? So obviously how your application handles that from its point of view is up to you, how you implement that. If Consul doesn't have an answer, it just replies there is no such service, or there is no instance running that service. So by default, Consul doesn't block. There is here and there's support for blocking queries like the ones I've mentioned in the presentation, watches and long polling and stuff, mostly for key values. I'm not sure. No, I think you can do long polling on the catalog as well. The catalog is where nodes and services are registered. But by default, nothing blocks and nothing is a new question. Another question, if we want to take an instance or instances of data API offline, can we do this from Consul? Say we want to reinstall it. So there are obviously many variables here. Taking it offline, so we can just stop connections going to it with intentions, which is the kind of evolution on firewall rules, and we'll see that at the end of the hands-on section. In terms of actually taking it offline, if it needs to, for example, gracefully shut down, we could do that with Consul's KV. So we could change one of the configuration parameters, and then we could have a watch that makes the application reload when that parameter changes. Or we could use stuff like env Consul or Consul templates that actually restarts or reloads the application when one of the key value engines changes. But Consul Connect doesn't actually itself interact with the applications. I hope that makes sense. Very good. How are we doing with gold emojis, guys? What's the status? Last I heard it was 5. Maybe 5 is enough because we don't want to wait too long either. Otherwise, people a bit ahead get bored. So, if you are done, please feel free to start with the next section. And this is all... oh no, here it is. So the next section is Service Discovery. So we've seen how Data API registers itself with Consul. Now, Service Discovery is about how front end finds Data API. So now log into the front end instance. Have a look at the bottom of the file frontend.py in this directory. And you should see the following couple of lines. So we're going to have a look at these and analyze them in a bit. So frontend also connects to its local Consul agent. That's just consul.consul. And then it queries the Consul catalog for a given service by name. So it says consul.catalog.service with the string data API. Don't worry about all this data mangling. That is just how the Python SDK that we're using, I think it's Python Consul 2, represents the data. So don't worry about that. But the interesting bit here is backend URL, which is the endpoint we're going to subsequently connect to. It's plain text HTTP of the address colon the port of the data API. And as we can see, frontend will subsequently initiate HTTP connections in secure directly to the data API service. The mechanism known as service discovery, which is what we're using so far, does not take care of nor dictate how the connection is made. It literally just helps us discover the service. It says, it's over there. You know where to go now. Also, as we can see, a developer has done the responsible thing and added a comment indicating the need for encryption. Here, to do implement SSL. So we're technically compliant, which is of course the best kind of compliant. As we have tried above, the data API service is directly accessible to anyone with network connectivity. Note here, for demonstration purposes, the firewalls have been left wide open for this DevOps playground. This is not recommended as a production setup. Another best practice for production hardening is not to get your best practices for production hardening from a 1-hour tech meetup on YouTube in the first place. So do this as well, guys. Have a look at this file, just read these couple of lines and see if they make sense to you in your own time. And when you're done, please spam the YouTube comments with the hockey stick and puck emoji. Puck? Probably puck. I see James has ordered himself a pizza. Very good choice. Whenever we're back to hosting playgrounds in person, which won't be in 2020, but hopefully not too soon after that, there are usually pizzas and beer, including, of course, alcohol-free beer, vegan pizzas, and whatever else you may want. One time there was even vegan ice cream, but don't hold me to that. So it's well worth coming along, even if you're not techie. There's a question, multi-text spec, getting file not found on the system. That should not be the case. Make sure you're logged into the correct instance. I assume multi-text spec is the username. So make sure you log into the front-end instance to find the front-end.py file, not the data API instance, if you're having issues finding the correct file. There's another question on Slack. From a front-end point of view, if the data API's URL changes on the Consul agent, is there a way to automatically restart the front-end instance so that the change is cascaded, or should the front-end instance be restarted manually? All right, this is a really cool feature I'm about to show you. So I'm just gonna hijack the kind of break for a second. There's a thing called Consul templates, or Consul template, and there's another thing called env Consul. So you could, for example, use env Consul for this. This has nothing to do with service mesh, but it's what we're currently looking at, which is service discovery. You could use env Consul. I think this works with service discovery. Definitely works with key value records. Env Consul. So you could the way env console works is you run env console, you give it some information. You have here, for example, prefix my app, and it will get all the key value records for that start with my app, for example, address, port, max cons, and it will make those available as environment variables for the process it then spawns. Here we're just spawning the process, which is the command env, which just prints all environment variables, which is obviously useful for debugging, but apart from that, a bit useless. And Consul template is very similar in that you can write a template in, I think, some Go templating language. You can put stuff like this in there, key foo, and it will go to Consul and figure out what the value for foo is and put that in place of this. And then you can run Consul template, give it a template in an output file, and I believe you can also tell it, yeah, there we are. You can even tell it, for example, service Redis restart or nginx dash signal reload to trigger changes in your application on runtime. I think this works with the catalog as well, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Yeah, I'll have to look that up offline. I don't want to stray too far from the task at hand. Let me check how many hockey clubs and pucks we have got so far. My support team, how are we looking for hockey clubs and pucks? We've got 7 hockey clubs and pucks, which I think is hands down a majority, or as we call it in Consul world, a quorum. So let's move on to the next section, which finally is about service mesh, which is what we all came here for. So part 1, to be on the receiving end. In the remainder of this DevOps playground, we will change the existing setup to replace Consul Service Discovery with its service mesh. In Consul, this is also known as Consul Connect. Let's start by registering a service mesh proxy for Data API. So here's what we'll do. We'll log into the Data API instance, so make sure to log into the other instance again. The way I'm doing it is I've got 2 tabs in my terminal of different colors, and I've got the front end one in blue on the left, and then I've got the backend of Data API one in, I think it's called Novel, yeah, Novel on the right hand side, and that's how I can easily keep them apart. So make sure log into the Data API instance, become root. I've given you a few sample commands. The password isn't June Panda. The password is I love Panda. So please use I love Panda instead of June Panda. And then we want to create a new JSON file somewhere within etc consul d. Consul d is Consul's configuration directory. So a command we can use for this, for example, is vim, if you like to use vim or vi. Say vim etc consul d data proxy API, data API proxy.json. Alternatively, if you prefer to use nano, please just simply disconnect, and there will be a competition later where you can win a few pizzas, but you will hereby have forfeited any pizzas you may have won. So once you've opened this file in Vim, please set the following content, which is just a bunch of JSON, which we're going to go through in a second. And then after you've done that, run consul validate on this directory, which tells Consul to check the configuration for any errors without reloading it or restarting anything. And then just consul reload to make Consul take the new configuration file into account. So what are we actually doing here? This step tells Consul that there is a Consul Connect proxy. This is currently a lie. There isn't. But we tell it there is a Consul Connect proxy, which listens on port 20,000, doesn't really matter, and serves as a proxy for the service data API. So, new service, name, data API proxy. What kind of service is it? It's a Connect proxy. It listens on this port, which is 20,000. Now, about its proxiness, it's a proxy for the destination service that goes by the name and by the ID of data API. The local address and port of that service is 127.0.0.1 and 5001. So if you are, like this proxy will be on the data API instance, you can reach the data API service on IP address 127.0.1 and port 5001. Please note, if you're already dismayed, if you use a different approach, a lot of these values can be omitted, but I've chosen to go down this route for now, just because it helps in our understanding to write these things out explicitly a bit more. But it's not always this intensive and redundant to configure these things. Right, quick note. After you've done this, if you have a peek at the Consul UI again, you should see that the data API service mentions the Connect proxy. Cool. So that's the first part. And then the second part, so this is a long section. The next step is to repent for our lie and actually create the proxy that we promised to Consul. So we create a new systemd service file called data API proxy.service. I've given you the vim command again. Hopefully all nano users will have disconnected by now. Obviously, I'm kidding about the nano users. You're more than welcome to convert and use vim, and you'll be certainly allowed to stay. And then you can set the following content. So yeah, just copy paste that. Most of it is just filler. What's interesting here is user console. This runs as user console. It doesn't need any privileges. It's just a little web server. And we execute the binary console with the parameters connect proxy and then sidecar for data API. So let's dig into that a bit, and then you guys can get hands-on. This starts a new process using the already installed Consul binary. So this user local bin console is the same binary that has, as I say here, many functionalities. It's the same binary that we're using for Consul server. If we're running a Consul server on that node, for a Consul client, if we're running a Consul client on that node, for the Consul CLI, for example, I'm scrolling up a tiny bit. Here when we set Consul validate, Consul reload, that is the Consul CLI, and that is the same binary as all the other Consul commands. And then finally, the Consul Connect proxy. The binary is given the instruction to be a sidecar for data API and can then simply read its own configuration from the local Consul agent. It's that simple. So that is why we have registered this service, the proxy as a service, before we started the proxy. Because if we do that, the proxy can just read its own information from Consul, which is fantastically convenient. Right, please guys, do this, and then when you're done with this section, please spam the YouTube comments with the juggling person emoji. And of course, let us know if you've got any issues. This is where it's really the plat de résistance of this playground. There is a question about Consul's key value store. Can we nest key values? Yes, you can. Hierarchically organized, you can absolutely nest them. I can give you a quick demo. We just go to key value, you can play around with it. We're not using it, so you can't break anything. Just go create, and then 1, and then we can edit 1 because it can have some data itself. I think JSON, CL, YAML. Can we edit this? We can go. Or we can say 1/2, and I'm not sure why I can't. It's a bit weird. There we are. Yeah, you have to click exactly here. So any record can be either a node or a key. You can nest them. That's absolutely fine. So feel free to whoever asked this question. Oh, I am unmuted. That's good. Feel free to play around with the key value stuff if you get bored and you're waiting. Also, another really useful trick if you guys want to play around with this at home. In your terminal, if you've got Consul installed, which again it's a single binary, install it, put in your path. Might even be on Homebrew. Go Consul agent -dev, and that's it. Now you're running your own Consul cluster with one node on your own laptop. So for example, I can go to 127.0.0.1, well-known port 8500, and this is my Consul cluster on my laptop. So I can have a look at nodes. The only node there, that's my laptop's serial number for some reason. That's also the host name. And then I can play around with key value and stuff. And when I go to the terminal, I just Control-C it. It shuts down, and everything is in memory. There's no messy leftovers. Consul won't be available anymore. So that's a useful command to play around with. So if you're interested, I'll just make it even bigger. The command is simply Consul agent -dev. Very useful. Hey, support crew, how are we looking with the... What emoji was it this time? Juggler, I think. How are we looking with the juggler emojis? Let me know. We've got 5 juggler emojis. Let's wait for one more. 6 out of 8. Is it 8? Is it 7? We got 6, so that's fantastic. Let me quickly do this. Hopefully the other people can catch up in that time. So log into the data API instance. As I said, I keep this open in my terminal window, left hand side here, become root, sudo -i, my password, there we are. Obviously best practice never to be root, but sometimes you just gotta be root, right? Vim etc consul.d data API proxy.json. Set paste and paste this stuff in. Fantastic. Let's check if it worked fine. Consul validate etc consul.d. It says configuration is valid, so we can just do a consul reload, and there we are, configuration reload triggered. And as I said, if we now go to services, data API should tell us I would have thought it was here. Let's move on. We'll get back to this in a second. So now we have, yes. So now we've told Consul that there is a proxy for data API, and we've done a Consul reload. So that's good. The next step is to create a service file. I can never type if people are watching. Apparently that goes for live streams as well. What did we decide to call it? Data API. The service should already exist, doesn't it? Aha, I am on the wrong instance. What did I tell you guys not to do? I said don't go on the wrong instance. Alright, let me do some clearing up. It's the price of this stupidity. Right, remove this, Consul reload. Type Consul correctly. Oh, also, it's probably going to be helpful if I make my terminal bigger. You probably didn't even see it. I didn't even have to own up to it. Right. So here also, let's make this terminal a bit bigger. Hopefully that works for you. So let's just copy paste some commands. Forgot to become root. All right, you guys are in for another treat. One of my favorite Vim hacks. I hope I can remember it now. You all know this problem. You've all been there before. I sound like an infomercial now. You've opened a file in Vim. You've painstakingly crafted exactly what you need to do. Refer to the documentation while you did it. Took you 10 hours. Now you want to save it. And lo and behold, you forgot to open it using sudo or root. So what can you do? Well, fear not. You can execute the following: :w, like you write. Now you do a space, and anything you type after here will be a new file name that you write it to. So you, for example, you could write it to a new file and then quit Vim and then copy them over manually. But it's even better. Exclamation mark means what comes now is a command. So I'll have a look at that error message later. What comes now is a command. So actually we'll pipe the contents of this file to this command. And as a command, we say sudo, finally getting us these elevated permissions, t, which means pipe this to a file, but also standard output. We're not interested in standard output. We're just interested in the file. And %, which is vi or vim for this file name. So let's try this and see if it works, or if this is just hugely embarrassing. Sudo password. worked. So now it says, warning, the file has been created after editing started. So basically it's changed, and now I can just ignore it or load. So I say L, and now I've loaded this file. It's still read-only, but I can see that the changes are there. And apparently there's a shortcut for this, which is just uppercase W, which I didn't know. So I learned something as well. Anyway, I hope that was informative and amusing, and I'm gonna get sudo now. Right. So we want to do console reload. We know that works. So I gotta catch up a bit. So now we want to register the service file. Okay, we've created the service file. Now we do a systemctl daemon reload to tell systemctl that there has been changes and please take it into account. And now we can do a systemctl start data API proxy.service. So now, even though, oh, and this explains why this didn't show here either. I'll refresh this quickly. Really ought to show now. This is just weird. Right, and now I'm starting this proxy. So yeah, data API and data API proxy are now both services. This should work. Right, cool. So that's basically it. I was hoping to see a mention in the Consul API that data API was running using the proxy, but it doesn't seem to want to. But I won't be dismayed. So let's continue with the next section. What is the next section about? Ooh, it's warm in it. Next section, after being on receiving end, dishing it out. Next, we want to create a similar setup on the front-end instance. We'll do it a bit differently to showcase the various configuration methods for Consul Services and Consul Connect proxy. So there's a few ways of going about this. In the data API, we actually registered the service from the app itself. And then we just wrote a different service configuration for the proxy. So those were independent. Here we're not going to register the service from the app, but we're going to register the service from a configuration file, just like we did with the proxy, which is also a service. And then we're going to define the proxy inline there, which is a bit more convenient even. So now we log into the front end instance, node to Jeff, that is the blue one. We'll get elevated privileges, and we can create a new JSON file again in console.d called frontend.json. Anyone using Nano would have disconnected by now, I hope. So we want to set the following content, which again is just JSON. And yes, what does this do? It registers a new service, which is the front-end service itself now, not the proxy, but the service itself. It listens on port 5000, and this, you're just gonna have to go with it. It's a bit convoluted, but when it comes to connect functionality, we want to register a sidecar service, so a service that is a different process but comes with this, and it is a proxy. And within this proxy, we would like to define an upstream. An upstream, also known as a dependency or upstream dependency, is something that I depend on. So for example, yeah, I'm not going to come up with a weird real-life example that supposedly makes it easier to understand, but actually just confuses everyone. In this example, front-end needs data API. So data API is the upstream of front-end. Front-end is a downstream dependency of data API. So here we define upstream dependencies for front-end, namely data API, and then we specify local bind port. So that is local to this instance, local to wherever front end lives. We say we're going to bind to port 12345 to create this tunnel, so to say, to data API. And that's it. After that, we do a quick console validate again, and then a console reload. And again, like before, we then have, after claiming there is a proxy, we want to actually create a Consul Connect proxy. So we create a new file, new systemd file. What is my cursor doing now? This is weird. And we set the following content. It's exactly the same as before, except that now it is a sidecar for front end rather than a sidecar for data API. But again, Consul Connect proxy will read its own configuration from console, so it'll figure out, oh, I'm a proxy for front end, so if someone wants to talk to front end and it comes through me, then I will forward that to port 5000, that's fine. And also front end will use me as a proxy for its upstream dependencies. So if front end talks to me on port 12345, then that actually means that it is a connection intended for data API. So now I will talk to console and figure out how I can reach data API. Oh, lo and behold, data API also has a proxy. I'm going to talk to that proxy and I will need a certificate. So they're going to do their whole mutual TLS stuff. So there's a lot going on here. It's quite complex, but it's relatively incredibly simple to set up out of the box. So at this point, we have started and configured both proxies. We should see 3 services in the Consul UI, Consul, front end, and data API. Consul registers itself as a service. It's a bit narcissistic like that. You can ignore that. So let's do a quick manual test when you're done setting up both proxies. Log in and switch your terminal to the front-end instance, and then run curl 127.01.12345. So basically talk to the proxy for front-end, because that will be listening on 12345 on localhost. So we just do a quick test, and we run curl to that and our endpoint from before any again. We're opening a connection to the Consul Connect proxy on the local instance, the front-end instance. Port 12345 is the port we have defined as one of the upstreams along above with destination name is data API. We therefore expect this to be equivalent to the admin list all endpoint we opened in our browser at the beginning of the hands-on session. But is it? So it's a bit of critical thinking again. See what's going on there and see if you can make sense of it. Also note that the direct connection to data API, for example from our browser, still works. And why wouldn't it? We haven't changed anything. But we'll have a look at that soon. Just to clarify what I was talking about at the beginning of the session. Just gonna go. The session we talked about this 5001 admin list all, and this gave us back some JSON error message. So that is what I'm talking about here. Cool. Please go through this section, and when you're done, there is a satellite emoji to spam YouTube with, so that we know that we're all on the same page. And as always, my lovely colleagues are in Slack, standing by for any support questions you may have, and any more loosely related questions, as we've established. And yes, someone spotted an obvious copy-paste mistake here. After we create front-end proxy.service, we then want to run systemctl start front-end proxy.service, not data API proxy.service. service. So well spotted, whoever spotted that. And yes. I'll just get a glass of water. I'll be right back. And we're still all here for you. Also, just to let you guys know, there will be a friendly competition tonight. There are 3 pizzas that you can win for next DevOps Playground. So stay tuned for the end of the session. After we finish the hands-on bit, there will be 2 competitions. One where the first person to send in the correct answer can win a pizza. And one where 2 people who send in a correct answer, different correct answer, can win a pizza for the next DevOps Playground. So email me, you will have my email address, and if you win a pizza, I will put you in touch with the powers that be, and next time we have a DevOps Playground, if you attend, you can have a pizza delivered to your place for free. So guys, so far we've received 2 satellites that I know of. This is a longer section, so I expect a lot of us are still working on it. If you're still working on it, please let my team know by sending in a few of those hourglass emojis again. There's emoji-based communication through and through, and that'll give us an idea of where we're at. Thanks. Okay guys, so we've got 4 satellites. So let's keep going with this. So satellites, that is this section. I'm dishing it out. So front end instance, we want to create a front end .json file in etc console d, and we want to put this JSON file in there. There we are. Just copy paste that. That should be fine. Again, what this means is we register a service by the name of frontend. The service itself listens on port 5000 for incoming connections. It's us connecting to it. Destination name of its upstream is data API, and local bind port 12345. So now we can run a console validate on this directory. Invalid character I, that is highly embarrassing. Console validate, fine. Now we can safely do a console reload. Very good, reload triggered. And now I want to create the service file. So vim, hold on. This is not vim at all. And this exact same service file, just with the difference, always with the I, with the difference that now we are registering a sidecar for front end. Right. Good. System CTL daemon reload, system CTL start front end proxy service, and now we should have the front end and the front end proxy both show up in console. So I'm gonna level with you guys. I'm slightly worried, but it'll be fine. Front end says there's one instance, and also it says connected with proxy. I expected data API to say this as well. I'm wondering if it is because of some reason I registered the data API on the wrong node first, that something's booked up. This should also say that it's connected with a proxy, but let's not panic quite yet. Just for good measure, I am going to start console here. Who knows? Maybe that does something. Cool. So now at this point, we have started and configured both proxies. We should see 3 services in the console UI. What happened? We should see 3 services in the console UI. No, yeah, sorry about that. Console, front end, and data API. And both front end and data API should say that they are using console a Consul Connect proxy. Cool. So let's do a quick manual check, and I've had reports that this failed for some people. So on the front end, as we can see, this is big. As we can see, we've got port 5000, which is where our actual front-end web app listens. We've got port 12345, which is the local bind port, which listens only on localhost. And we will now try and connect to that one. Curl HTTP 127.0.0.1.2.3.4.5, and the endpoint, because this will come out on the other end and basically connect to the data API. Admin list all. Great, so that did not entirely go as expected, which is not great. That's just not great. give me 1 minute to play around with stuff. Consul catalog services has data API proxy. Hold on, what? Consul members. All right, that's not great. Consul restart. Is that a command? That's not a command. Systemctl restart consul service. Hopefully it'll find its mate again. We've set up cloud auto join, so hopefully consul members. Okay, they're both alive now. So catalog. Why does that only have data API and data API proxy? Consul catalog services. All right, well, that is not fantastic. That is not fantastic. Why aren't these synchronizing? Give me 1 second. Please excuse me while I'm quietly panicking. This is not fantastic. Consul members, it still only sees 1. That is not great, is it? Yeah, this is not great. This is slightly better. Yeah, so this is meant to work, so let's just pretend it worked. Right. Oh, hold on, I've got 3% battery. It's not optimal preconditions either. I could have just let it die and escaped all the embarrassment, but you got to see through what you got to see through. So about this paragraph, what we would have expected to see instead of this message, this admin endpoint is protected, we should have seen basically the same as here. I'm going to pipe this through JQ. I'm not going to pipe this through JQ. Not an error message, but just an empty list of sessions and users and status okay. Because this protection is just checking the remote address, which is not very common, but is something you may do. So I just wanted to raise your awareness that if you're using Consul Connect from the application's point of view, every connection will come from localhost. So that is a quick bracket I wanted to open here. Right, the moment of truth. I feel like the moment of truth is already passed, but somehow in work. Can I poll you guys quickly? Did this curl command work for you? Yes or no? Can we just have a series of thumbs ups or thumbs downs, respectively, in the YouTube channel? I want to know whether it's something to do with me messing up on my end, or whether there is a configuration issue somewhere that affects all of us. So please just let me know if this command curl, if that has worked for you, if you got a response back, or if it was similar to what I got, and it just said connection closed. Hey, it works! It works! It works! Guys, it works! Wait, why did front end go now? I'm so confused. I'm so confused. Anyway, it works. It works, that's good. That is good. Alright, so this is exactly, ignore the last 10 minutes, this is exactly what I expected to happen. So we opened a connection from front end to localhost 127.0.0.1 on front end, port 12345, which is where the proxy is listening, and the proxy knows that that port corresponds to the upstream data API. So if I talk to that, the proxy will take care of the routing, fully encrypted between the instances, and come out the other end. So fine, cool. Let's move on with the moment of truth. 4 no's, 3 no's, 4 no's. Okay, that's not good. Well, how does it work? So there don't seem to be any major error messages. In fail to synchronize. Hold on, this is useless. Joined, agent started DNS server, scroll down. Error, memory is conflicting address for data API mine. For data API. Oh. So I'm communal horse. Hold on, I'm not communal horse. I'm sensible pangolin. Okay. Okay. Well, there seems to be an error with the setup, guys. I'm really sorry. There seems to be an error with the setup of our Consul clusters. I guess the least I can do is walk you through what the error is. We'll have a Hail Mary at fixing it, but if it's not fixed, we'll just have to call it a day. I really apologize for this. So the way this works is the Consul cluster, consists of servers and of clients. In this case, we have one server, the one that resides on data API, it doesn't really matter. And we've got one client, the one on front end. The client has this configuration line in it. The syntax is a bit weird, but it is what it is. Retry join, which means please join this, and if you fail, just keep trying. And there is a special syntax for cloud auto join. Here we say provider is AWS, so I'm telling it look up AWS instances using tags to find out whom you have to join. Tag key is Consul server 4, and tag value is, and then this unique word. So the Consul server has a tag in AWS with key Consul server 4 and value, well, probably sensible pangolin rather than communal horse, which explains why there is an issue here. So let me try the following. I am just going to, and do the same if you can, consul d config.json. I am going to change my communal horse for whatever is actually in my URL that I've been given, in this case sensible pangolin. Right, and now I am going to just restart Consul. No, that's not enough. I am going to stop console, and I'm going to delete this data directory valid console. No, that's also not good. I am going to, oh my god. I'm sorry about this, guys. Systemctl. Let's start console again and see what it does. Console members. So it is connected to data API, which has an IP address ending in 177, and this guy has an IP address ending in 236. So that's definitely the wrong one. That is definitely the wrong one. So I am going to try and leave this cluster. Console force leave, forces a member to leave, but there is also a normal leave. So let's try this. Console leave. So this is left. So if I run, this isn't even the server. So that's cool. Systemctl stop console. Cool. Now I'm going to, if this works, I'll put instructions there, but I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up in half an hour at the latest. Move this to deleted, and now systemctl start console, and now hopefully the console agent will start have a blank slate, so not know anything of its history, because that was all stored in the data directory valid console. And it'll now try this cloud auto join stuff, and hopefully it'll join this server, which has an IP address ending in 236. So let's have a look at that. Console members. No, it's not quite up yet. Let's see what's going on. Error creating agent. What's the error? Hold on, it's probably the fact that mkdir var lib console doesn't exist and doesn't belong to console. So let's try this again. Console members. Yeah, these are not the same members. 154, 177, 236. Right, I think it's probably sensible to call it a day here. Let's just run through the rest of the script, the what if, so to say. So now that we have the tunnel up between these two instances, what we would have done next is to reconfigure front end to make use of it. So that would have just been on the front end instance, changing the file frontend.py. This is the current configuration, and we can comment all of this out and just say backend URL. You don't need to worry about all the console logic anymore. You don't need to worry about implementing SSL. Just connect to localhost port 12345, and that is it. Then systemctl restart front-end service, and it will use the tunnel to connect to the data API. The bit called hardening is basically the converse. The data API is reachable from the proxy, but it is still also reachable from the wider network because it listens on 0000. So what we would have liked to do there is change that to 127.0.0.1. And then we could have tried stuff like this, and this would have just given us connection refused, which is obviously more secure than exposing our backend API through an unencrypted connection across the network. Cool. And then next we would have had a look at intentions. We can still have a look at can't actually have a look at intentions. Intentions are here. So this is the equivalent of a firewall rule. We would have gone create intentions. We would have started by creating a default deny rule. Default deny, which means that any traffic, this is across the service mesh, so from any proxy to any other proxy, we know which services these are talking to each other. Any service talking to any other service will be denied, and then we could have added, it's not in my list now, I apologize. Let's pretend this is front end and this is data API. We could have said allow this, and then we would have this order of precedence automatically depending on which rule is more specific. So front end would be able to talk to data API, but for the rest, all traffic would be blocked. So that is what we would have done in this section called good intentions. And then we could have tried again. The app would still work. The app would still work, but we wouldn't be able to connect in any other way. All right, that brings us to the end of the meetup, almost. So there is the contest that I announced, which is still going on. So the first challenge is, given the following premise, which is true, frontend.py, as we've seen, listens on 0000, so any IP address, port 5000. Front end, for additional context, it's hosted on an EC2 instance in AWS running Ubuntu 18.04. But I can reach the app by omitting the port in my browser, i.e. using port 80. How did I implement that? So again, if I just go to Sensible Pangolin port 80, not putting any port, that gets me through to this instance. But if we have a look at opt dpg frontend.py, we are listening on port 5000. So the question to you is, how did I implement that? And if you are the first to reply correctly, please copy paste in the code or configuration or option or whatever it is that proves you found how I did this. Email me to jeff.hemmen@ecs-digital.co.uk and you can win a pizza for next week's DevOps Playground. And then the second contest is a bit more loosely structured. Frontend Py and Data Py are written in Python 3 using the Flask framework, and you have access to the source code. The challenge is find any exploit. If you just get it to show a 500 error page, that doesn't count. An exploit should be a bit interesting, but it is a low bar. You may want to copy the files to try at home. And the first two people to email me with an actual exploit that I can reproduce at home win. So again, my email address is jeff.hemmen@ecs-digital.co.uk. And that is it, basically. Thank you very much for attending. I'm sorry that things took a wrong turn, but I hope you still learn things in principle. We're always here if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to us via email, via Slack, possibly YouTube comments. And that is it, basically. I'll stick around if there are any more questions. I'll stick around for 10-15 minutes. Yeah, thanks again for attending, guys. So there is a question, thank you very much. This is just governing traffic between the Consul proxies, presumably. It's not writing host-wide IP tables, rules and whatnot. No, absolutely not. This doesn't do security groups or IP tables or anything. So you still want sensible firewalls in whatever levels you deem fit, so that your other services can't talk to each other directly. Remember, a lot of it is mitigated by the fact that you can now make your services only listen on localhost. But indeed, you should still have a sensible layer of other firewalls. So maybe just leave a range whitelisted, and then you can have the proxies listen on those ports. So in our example, that was Data API's proxy listening on port 20,000. So you could have, for example, 20,000 to 30,000 whitelisted, and then you can randomly generate the port there using whatever orchestration you use or something. I'll also join the support Slack channel. So if you've got any questions, I'll have a look at them directly there as well. Interesting, Avi. You say your Consul catalog services. Oh, the services output. Try running Consul members. See if those outputs match. So yeah, a lot of people had the same issues as me. Which is a dear shame, but such is life with live demos, isn't it? Someone says the fact I wasn't aware it's been 2 hours shows how interesting this was. Cheers. Well, thank you for that. I'm really glad I didn't just waste everyone's time. Well, I did, but I'm glad at least you're not bitter about it, guys. Yes, fantastic. So let's play around a bit more until people get bored again. I have to sign off in 5-10 minutes. But a couple of other console commands. So Consul members shows us, if we type it right, shows us which nodes are part of our Consul cluster. So here we've got a node called Data API and a node called Frontend, and we have their addresses. 8301 is the port on which Consul nodes talk to each other. There's also 8300 and 8500 is the API port. And if I run Consul members, oh dear. Sorry, that'll be my pizza. So I'll have to sign off in just 2 minutes. Nah, to be realistic, it takes them at least 3 minutes to find my door. Pizza's always cold. But again, at least I'm not bitter about it. So if I run Consul members in one tab, and then I run Consul members in another tab, those IP addresses should be the same. Here we've got 177.154. Here we've got 236 and 154. So at the very least, something is a bit fishy here. So our cluster isn't set up perfectly fine. It is really, yeah, it is a bit tricky to spin up lots of completely isolated Consul clusters in the cloud, because they all communicate with each other using gossip. So if you want to join a cluster, you just need to talk to one node. So even if just one of them is misconfigured, then now 2 clusters are joined and they all have an awareness of each other. I'm not exactly sure how this happened here, but yeah, that's another that's a way of figuring out what's going on in our cluster, and I expect we'll see the same in the GUI. So FE, and the other one I think was API. So front end, if we have a look at nodes, and here we go to API, again port 8500, which is the API and the UI actually. It's a bit zoomed in, isn't it? So if we have a look at nodes, 65 and 180, and here we've got 41 and 172. So our clusters are definitely a bit bulked up, which explains why none of this works. All right, I think we'll leave it there then, guys. There don't seem to be more questions. Thank you again so much for coming. Thanks also for all your supportive comments. And I hope you'll join us next time when we have a DevOps Playground. And don't forget to email me if you think you have a chance at winning one of them pizzas. All right, with that, guys, I'm going to sign off. I hope you stay safe. I hope you will be... Where is the thing that I'm streaming? Ah, here it is. Aha. Now I just broke my sign-off message. I was going to make up like some Stephen Fry be excellent to each other type thing.